Welcome everyone to episode 27 of the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. I'm your host Jesse, and this is the man with a mustache, Andrew.
You started out so serious, and I'm just like, and I'm Peter Mansbridge.
This is a cool episode, and I always say that, and everyone's like, that was a cool episode. So I'm like, yeah, okay. But anyway, this is a cool episode.
You're a prophet?
Yeah. It's that time of year when summer's winding down, and the first thing that some of you have already fished for these fish, but you're probably starting to think about it, salmon. It's salmon season. It's here. You know, I was just saying to Andrew that as we recorded this in mid-August, people have already caught fish in the creeks and off the pier already. And
I too am aware of these facts since Jesse just told me literally 2 seconds ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to get more into like when you can catch them. But by this time, like, you know, we're right up in September now. And man, it's the time of year that literally you can go to a lot of the creeks around here and catch probably one of the biggest fish of your life, which is amazing. But before we get into that, Andrew has a TNT. And we wrote this down. We actually got an email a few episodes ago. Mm-hmm. Andrew hated when I said, what was it?
Triple T.
Triple T. He hates it. So I was like, okay, we're going to rename it. So we asked people what they wanted to
change. It's a great segment. I hate the name.
Yeah. And I said, Andrew hates it. I love it. So we actually had a few people suggest different things. And we had a guy named Jeff email us. And he said that we should change it to this.
Tips and Tactics.
Which would be TNT. Which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, so now we're going to be calling it TNT. So thanks, Jeff.
Some cool facts about to blow you away.
So anyway, Andrew has a TNT this week. So what do you got?
So I have talked before about one of my favorite ways to fish surface weeds is everyone always talks about frogs. One of my things I prefer, I wouldn't say prefer over frogs, but it is really high up there, is a Texas rigged fluke.
Yes.
So if you're not sure what a fluke is, I have a couple examples of the difference. So this is a fluke, and this is the Z-Man Streaks XL. I use the large ones because you can see them. And this is the diesel minnows, also from Z-Man. So the diesel minnow is a paddle tail. Essentially, a fluke is a paddle tail without the paddle. So it just comes down to a nice fine tip, oftentimes with a split tail on the back. But a fluke is very streamlined, minnow-style soft plastic. So my favorite way to fish these is actually weightless, just like this one here. So this is an A-dot beast hook I have rigged onto this big Streaks XL.
How big is that thing?
This thing I think is like 7 inches long.
It's a big fluke, very big. Yeah.
What I love about the Z-Man product, so I have the Z-Man Streaks, I have the scented jerk shads. I even have the razor shads, which are originally designed as a chatterbait trailer, but I will also fish them the same way as a regular fluke. What I like about them is because they're using the Cyberflex plastic, it floats. As you know, whenever you look at the old stuff with Z-Man, it floats.
Yeah. It
takes a lot of abuse. When I was fishing. My favorite thing, I had a pack of 3 that you gave me. I talked before about these. Yeah. And they were the old flukes. They came down to a single tail, and they were the old Cyberflex from Strike
King. I think they're called like the Zoo 2 or something like that.
Yeah. And so I had those. I had a pack of 3. They lasted me about 5 years. That pack of 3 baits. They last a long time. I would have that rigged on a hook, and I'd just like take it off the rod, and I'd fish that thing for over a year. The last one I had, because it was the last one, I fished that thing for 2 years.
Yeah.
And in fact, this one here, again, it is Z-Man, it's the razor shad. This is the exact bait that about 3 years ago, I caught my biggest largemouth on, which is 4.5 pounds, I think. Something like that. The biggest fish of the year over largemouth for us on this one. So this is... again, Texas rigged. This does have a weight on the bottom of it, but my favorite way to fish these is either weighted or weightless. Weighted ones I like fishing around docks because you can skip it. They skip really easy because there's no exposed hook. You don't have to worry about snagging into anything, and it's a big thing of soft plastic, so you can skip this super easy under docks.
Yep. There's nothing to catch the water.
And I don't like to use something too heavy. I want it to slow sink because, again, if it's under a dock, chances are you have a maximum of 6 feet of depth under that, and so it's I just want it to slowly sink down and underneath the dock, and then you just can twitch it through, and you can walk the dog with these things underwater, which is exactly what I do. And then they'll come out and nail this thing before it even escapes the shadow of the dock.
Yeah.
I love it. So that's how I normally fish the weighted ones. I primarily only use those around like timber or docks is when I'll fish those. My favorite way is weightless. All rig stuff. You can fish non-floating ones without a weighted hook. You can just use, this is actually the rattlesnake. Classic old bait. Can't get these anymore, but it's it's just an example of a fluke. But you can rig these weightless, and they'll just sink very slowly in the water. So again, with a constant retrieve, they'll stay pretty close near the surface. And again, you can twitch it, and it just walks a dog underwater the whole time. So with this one here, this is as an example, the Streaks XL, Texas rigged. And what I'll do is, with any fluke, even the smaller ones here, I'll cast out into lily pads, into rice, into arrowheads, whatever. And as I'm pulling it through, I'll just kind of quiver my rod tip as I'm just reeling slowly. And this thing is just like snaking its way through all the weeds. And because there's no hook point, there's no, even the knot I'll actually bury in the front of the plastic. I'll rig it a little bit further back. So there's nothing to catch on any weeds. It's way more weedless than a frog.
Yeah.
And this thing just sits right at the top of the water and twitches its way through it. And it actually slither underneath the lily pads. So when bass come up to take this thing, they don't have to they're not going to hit the bottom of the pad, send it flying. They'll come up and they'll just come up, and they don't usually it's not a huge blow up.
They just slurp
They just
it.
come in and it's just gone off the surface. You'll see like a little ripple. Sometimes you get like the big tail, like the swirl of them coming after they turn and grab it. But we were camping one time when I first started fishing these with Jesse around. We were fishing frogs. We weren't having a whole lot of success that day.
Yeah, it was slow.
And I put on it was the old Strike King that I had Texas rigged, and I was fishing it just like that. Just cast out right onto shore and just twitch it through with a rod tip, and it's just like shaking the rod tip as you reel in slow, and it just allows it to pull through all those weed stems. And I was getting bass after bass. That morning I destroyed Jesse. Not the whole trip. That morning I destroyed him.
He wouldn't give me one.
I only had one left. It was the last one.
That's true.
So that's something that I'm always on the lookout for, fluke style baits, just because with such a slender profile, super weedless, it's not something that bass often see because everyone loves fishing frogs, which I do too. They're amazing. But sometimes fishing something like this, and again, because the Z-Man floats, anything that uses a floating plastic, you can just dead stick it like I talked about before. And you can just let that sit. So it can be a nice kind of finesse approach, because even though it's a fair size profile, like this is an 8/0 hook and it's a fairly large bait, but a 2-pound bass would have no issue in hailing that thing. And you just twitch it in and just pause it. They'll come up and eat that.
Yeah.
So that's my my tips and tactics for this week.
TNT.
So if you are a fan of topwater fishing, if you're a fan of using soft plastics, and you're a fan of not picking weeds off your hooks, give it a try. They are extremely productive.
For many species, muskie, pike, bass, walleye. Yeah.
I actually got these for pike and muskie primarily.
Yeah, they're big.
Yeah.
You know what? You did so good that I have a present for you.
Ooh.
You know what it is?
No. That's amazing. That's amazing. I had no clue. And there it is. That's the old shads right there. Also, it does have 2 tails.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
What is it?
Right.
It's the Strike King.
It's the Strike King salt impregnated formula. So it's a Strike King. It's got the Z-Man or the Cyberflex. Oh, it smells like garlic. I love the garlic smell.
Old school garlic.
I miss that.
Here, let me smell that. I haven't smelled that in years.
So good.
And what is it called? The Zoo-Tooth?
So it's the Strike King 3X.
It says right on there.
There's Z2. Yeah.
Z2. Yeah. That's the lure that the bait Andrew's been looking for forever.
Yep. That's a cool color too. That's a nice like dark green.
Yeah. Enjoy, pal.
Oh, that's excellent. I'm so pumped. So stuff like this, actually this one exactly, I like using a small 3/0 finesse EWG because it is salt impregnated. It doesn't float as well, but I believe this one, it should still float, especially if you stretch it out a bit, get rid of some of the salt.
Yeah.
But after a bit of use, it'll start floating more. But a nice finesse EWG is perfect for these.
Awesome.
Oh, I'm pumped.
So anyway,
there we go.
Put that right there up by the loon. So we're going to get into our main topic of salmon fishing. Now, we actually have 2 episodes coming up. This is kind of a 2-parter So this week we're going to talk about shore casting for salmon, and then next week we're going to talk about creek fishing for salmon. And then after that, we have our special guest when we're camping. So we're pretty excited about that.
Yep.
So we're going to talk about shore casting for salmon. Now, before we get into this, I would like to mention that we do have a full YouTube video, and it's all about shore casting for salmon, and it goes in depth. We put the video out I think 3 or 4 years ago. It goes in depth about everything that we will not be able to cover today. This podcast would be like 2-3 hours long if we did. So I'm going to link that below. If you want more information, please watch that video, and that will probably answer some questions that we won't be able to go over today. So we're going to go over just the absolute basics of shore casting for salmon. I think one of the main things about shore casting for salmon that is so awesome is how accessible it is. Again, we live in the GTA. If you live around any of the Great Lakes that has a salmon population, like we said, it is the one time of year when these giant fish that are normally in really deep water and are basically inaccessible to the average angler. Like, yeah, if you have a big salmon boat and you can troll with downriggers, that's great. But the average person does not have that at all. So at this time of year, mid-August, coming into September, these big kings start pushing into the shallows. And the guys and girls that are usually the first ones to catch them are on the piers casting. Okay. So we're going to kind of go back and forth. Me and Andrew are going to kind of tell you some of our experiences and tips. It's already September. I have caught salmon. The earliest I've caught salmon off the pier when I was young. So I grew up down by the lake, by a pier, and I fished steelhead and salmon since I was allowed to go down to the creek. So when I was like 12, 13 years old, I've been fishing. You
didn't have really bass fishing accessible to you.
Not as much, yeah. So for me, it was that. So I used to fish off the pier and in the harbors a lot when I was growing up, a lot. So as soon as it was like, usually mid-August, I was just itching. I was just waiting for that big rain to bring some of these fish in. The earliest I've caught fish, I caught fish in late July one time. Late July, after a huge rain, me and my buddy went down. We were casting and people were like, oh, it's too early. It's too early. I caught one. Silver as a dime, like beautiful fish. So it is possible to catch them, especially on a deep pier. Some of the piers are in shallower water. Some of them are in deeper water. So if you're fishing earlier in the season, a deeper pier might be a little better for you. But generally speaking, we're going to keep this pretty basic. Late August, September, all the way into October, casting around harbors and rivermouths can be deadly. And we're going to go over the techniques, when to fish, what lures to use, and some tips on how to actually get these fish into the shore so you can take a picture of them. So I thought we could just talk about when. So not daytime or nighttime, but when are you going to start fishing? What types of days are you going to fish? If you have a choice. And we're talking around this time of year.
Weather-wise, what kind of day am I looking for?
Yeah. If you had a choice. I know a lot of us, we have to fish on days that we have off. We can't just, take a day off work. But what day, say you have a day to take off and you're waiting throughout the week to go, what is the ideal day to go out for these fish at the rivermouths?
I would say not a weekend.
Yeah.
I don't like the crowds. I know we just had that story posted actually the day we're recording this about, do you like crowds or no? It's I hate them.
Yeah.
I mainly look for, if I have a preference, is I don't mind if there's a bit of wind blowing into shore. I like that. Yeah. And if I know there's a storm coming, the fish can feel that pressure changing and they'll start staging and getting real close to start in expectation of that rain coming in. Yeah. So if there happens to be a storm coming that I know is being forecasted, chances are they're going to, and especially if there's wind blowing in, that storm is approaching, they're probably coming right into shore, getting all excited to start running up that creek.
Yeah. So if you have to fish daytime, nighttime, generally speaking, the best times, I'm not saying you can't catch them in the middle of the day. You can.
Oh, you're asking for hours. Okay.
No. I'm switching now. So yeah, you covered that well.
Okay.
But now we're kind of going to the day. So again, we probably fish all these different times over the years. My favorite time to fish is actually at night or sunset to night. We've had really good days early in the morning, as the sun's coming up. Once those fish are staging in the harbor area or in the rivermouth area, it depends on the harbor. Some harbors, like we mentioned, they're, or rivermouths, they're shallow and they don't generally hold the fish during the day. There may be a few swimming around, but as soon as the sun comes up, they kind of push back into deeper water. Some of the marinas or harbors or rivermouths are deeper and they all actually stick around. So you can actually catch them during the day. Now, if your options are just to fish during the day, ideal days to go is when it's cloudy, it's raining, and it's windy. If it's bright blue skies, dead calm, and hot, not the best day. You can catch them, but it's not the best. You want it to be overcast, raining, windy. You want that. That's the time that these fish are going to feel more comfortable and be coming in shallow. So that would be the main thing if you can only go out during the day. But I would highly recommend going at night, evening time to night. I know there's always the saying, the fish start biting at 3 a.m. Like, you'd be casting all night and they stop biting, and then you keep waiting, and then you'll catch one, then you'll want to stay out longer, and then it ends up you're there and it's 2 a.m. in the morning and you have to go to work the next day and you're doomed. But that's problems
never happened to us.
Yeah. That's only problems for people with jobs. But we have
Shots fired.
Yeah. We have had really good days in the morning, but what I have found personally is you will catch fish early in the morning, but as soon as the sun comes up, within like half an hour, the fish just go back deep and they're really hard to catch.
So it's nice because it is the fall, playing into the timing and the daylight hours and all that stuff. What we normally do is, again, we work full time. We are at work all day, and then we'll meet up at the harbor at like 6, 7 o'clock as the sun's like setting.
Yeah.
We'll be out there just, hour before sunset max pretty much, getting prepped. And then we're already have our spot. We're all set up, rigged up. And that way we can be out there for 3-4 hours, and be home at 11 or midnight. So we're not
at a reasonable
crazy
time.
late.
And again, like if they're biting, we might stay out late.
Yeah.
If it's
on fire and it's like, all right, we're going to have a good night, we'll stay out as long as we have to, and I'll deal with the consequences the next day.
Yeah.
That's an issue for tomorrow, Andrew.
Yeah. Future Andrew. But yeah, highly recommend nighttime. And it's very popular, especially with like glow in the dark lures, but we're going to get into that a little bit more.
Anyone who lives in our area though, they actually bite really well midday, and you should go home at like 6.
Yeah. Leave the spots for us. So anyway, you get down to the river mouth or the harbor, and there's several ways to catch these fish. So we're going to kind of briefly talk about some of the most popular lures. And if you fish for salmon, these are not going to be a surprise to you. You probably already named them right now in your car.
First of all, before you open that box, I need you to close it. I need you to hold it up for anyone who's watching on YouTube, because
I drew this.
The drawing on this tackle box it's so Jesse. And having known him like my whole life pretty much, I remember anything that he ever purchased, he'd start drawing like this salmon, like that salmon head, he'd draw on everything, absolutely everything. And he just scratch his initials into his reels, and he'd put a salmon head on whatever he could.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad, and it just brings a smile to my face every time I look over and I go salmon fishing with this guy and I see this salmon box how old is that box? That's not new.
It's pretty old. It's like 10 years old. Yeah.
I'm like, the good old days.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to go over a few lures basic. So you have to think, when you're short casting for salmon, generally speaking, you want to be able to cast really far. Now that's not always the case, but generally speaking, you're wanting to cast really far, cover water, and be effective with each cast. Some areas, it depends, like some harbors or marinas, you may have to be a little more strategic in your casting if you're casting around, dock pilings or stuff like that. But generally, if you're fishing off a pier, for instance, you're going to want to cast really far. And we're going to get into gear and how to, accentuate the casting distance part of that. But with lures, we're going to cover literally like 3 or 4. That's it. Because I feel like this is like a beginner's guide to catching salmon off the pier and the harbors. And you don't need, like, I have this whole box of baits. These are just baits that I've picked up over the years. And this isn't even all of them. But if I had to go to the harbor and I only had to bring like 5 or 6 lures, I'd be happy with that. Because generally speaking, the cool thing with salmon is they don't learn. Now, this is pretty, it's not sad, but this is the reality of it.
Yep.
Salmon are one of the dumbest fish you can catch. And I'll tell you why. They hatch in the creeks. They stay there for a bit. They go into the lake. They feed like crazy for 3-4 years. They live in the lake their whole life, basically. All they do is eat. They're eating machines. They come into the harbor. They've never seen anything else. They've never been up a creek. Nothing like that. They're completely dumb fish. They come into these harbors for the first time in their life, and there's all these spoons and spinners and crankbaits and stuff. They've never seen anything like that. They hit them. They go up the stream. They die. They don't pass down information to their kids.
If you're confused about that sequence of events, just go back and watch our favorite episode of the Magic School Bus.
Yes.
Where they get turned into fish eggs, and then a male salmon comes over and milts all over them.
Yeah. PG-13.
Great children's show.
So basically, unlike bass or say like a muskie that has seen multiple lures over its lifetime and maybe has gotten caught in multiple times, salmon their lifespan of when they go up into the harbors, when you can catch them from shore and then go up the creek, is very little.
Yeah.
And then they die. So they don't actually remember anything. The next fish that come the next year are completely new fish.
Yeah.
So the techniques that you use over the years have not changed, and they will never change.
Yeah. Unlike steelhead, salmon only reproduce once.
Yes.
So
and then they die.
Yeah. They don't, there's no real dropbacks with salmon. You get with steelhead, not with salmon. So yeah.
Yeah.
You have one chance. You have one chance to see that fish specifically in its lifespan, pretty much.
So I'm trying to dig some of these lures out of this box, so hopefully it's not too noisy for you. So I'm going to cover 3 or 4. That's it. And I'd say, Andrew, if you could only have one lure for shore casting for salmon, what would it be?
Little Cleo.
It's going to be a little Cleo.
A glow Little Cleo. If I had to choose color, I would say blue. It's just classic.
So here's a Little Cleo. The most popular size is 3/4 ounce.
Best ones have a little girl on the backside of it.
Yeah.
The wiggle lure.
The old school ones actually had a topless woman on the back. I still have a few of them. I won't fish them because I want to keep them. And I remember I found a bunch in my grandpa's old tackle box, and I just they're like keychains now. Yeah. But anyway.
So they just stopped that. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm just saying they stopped it. So now they're essentially a collector's item. If you have one, look in your box. Maybe don't cast that one.
Yeah, hold on to it. So anyway, we're going to get back.
I use one as a keychain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're going to get back to the non-weird naked stuff. So Little Cleo, like I was saying, when I worked at the tackle shop, when we used to get in our Little Cleos, I would always tell people, I'm like, even if they came in August or like late July, is like, buy them now. Because at the time, I don't know what it was, but they were in such a shortage. Like, you would go to the store in like September and they'd all be sold out.
Yep. So
I was like, buy them now. And like guys would come in, and I remember Little Cleos, the 3/4 ounce glow ones, used to be $3.99, and now they're like $10.99. It's insane.
Yeah. When they jumped up the last time, because they were for a while, I think $5.90 or $6.90, and then they jumped up to like $9.
Yeah.
And so there's one store in a local area, and there was some of the spoons, because they had priced the old ones and they were just sitting back in the rack, and the new ones had the new price, but they never changed the tag on the old ones. So I went there and just like going off the rack, peeling all the old ones off. So I stocked up before the price jumped.
Yeah. But anyway, regardless of price, the most popular size is the 3/4 ounce. There's another size too that's slightly smaller that I'd recommend as well. Generally speaking, again, you're going to be trying to cast as far as possible. The size below that I'd recommend too, there's a size that's 2/5, just slightly smaller than the 3/4. And I find size wise, 3/4 is the king. You can, especially at night and during the day, it casts far too. But this little 2/5 size one, I've seen guys smash on this, and like as the sun's coming up and the fish start getting a little bit more finicky, the slightly smaller size, it's just slightly different. And for some reason, like, remember that time we were fishing and the guy beside us was using the small one? Yep. He caught like 3 fish, and we were just like, what is he using? The same lure as us, just slightly smaller. Yep. So they're not intelligent fish, but sometimes they're very moody. Very moody. You'll just see them swimming around and they won't want to have anything to do with it. And other times they just smash anything in front of them. Yep. So the glow Little Cleo at night is a staple. One thing we'll go over quick is just color. For glow, I know a lot of people are like, oh, I like this one in blue, or I like it with the orange dots, or it has to be this color with this pattern. We've tried all kinds of glow spoons. And again, I used to fish like religiously the salmon run off the pier and stuff. I really think it's more of a confidence thing. There are some times when I think they will hit another color better than others, just for whatever reason, but I don't think it really matters most of the time.
The thing is, once the sun sets too, you're not seeing the other color. All you're seeing in the water is the glow. Yeah. So I don't think,
but some of the colors, it has different amounts of glow on it. You know what I mean? Like the one with dots has like, it's more blotchy.
I think the difference that could come up is, like I said, if there's dots on it or how the stripe is, that can give a different kind of break up the pattern of it, or different contrast underwater with the glow, just how the glow is painted on. But as for the remaining color, I don't think the color itself matters. But the only thing I could see changing something perhaps would just be the pattern of the glow on the spoon.
Yeah. And I guarantee there will be guys that will be like, you're absolutely wrong. There is
That's fine. They can say that.
No, I'm just saying that. But I personally feel like over, 20 years of fishing for salmon off the pier, I don't think that it matters that much, because I know we'll be fishing off the pier and there's tons of people out there, and I'll talk to some of the guys like, or it has to be orange, and catches fish. And the other guy's like, it has to be blue, and he catches fish. It's whatever you have confidence in. It's just like bass fishing, whatever color, as long as you present the lure properly, I don't really think the color has as much to do with it.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you're fishing at night, glow. You need glow. And there's lots of really cool spoons on top of, say, spoons, the little Clio. Another one that we've really liked recently is, well, for quite a while, it's the Len Thompson glow spoons.
Yep.
The cool thing is, we mentioned this in our Len Thompson podcast, one of the earlier ones we did. Len Thompson actually has a new super glow. Now, I ordered a whole bunch of Len Thompson glow spoons. And to be perfectly honest, the glow is kind of not disappointing. It's just like, it wasn't the best.
Yeah.
We still caught tons of fish on them. I was still happy with them. But when they announced this year that they have a new super glow color and a bunch of new patterns that look sick, like this one, I don't even know what this one's called, but it's like, you know, it has some purple and orange and chartreuse and white and glow, and it looks really good. And I did test these. They do glow very bright. So if maybe before you were kind of turned off by the glow, give them another chance. These ones look really good. And yeah, I saw they're at the stores now and everything now too. And another very popular spoon is the moonshine spoons.
Yes.
And they glow like the sun. They're like the surface of the sun.
It's kind of cool. The first time you ever use one, you'll shine your light on it and you'll cast out and you just see like a shooting star across the sky and you're like, oh, my spoon.
Yeah. They glow like
make
the sun.
Make a wish.
Yeah. Very, very bright. And we'll get very briefly into glow, because what I hear a lot of people that are getting into salmon fishing, they'll say, oh, this one glows really bright. It's better than this spoon that doesn't glow as bright. I think that's bunk. Like, I don't think that's actually a deal. The thing that I learned from a lot of the old timers that used to fish off the pier is they would say, oh, we always catch more fish on our little Clios when they're just about to, you know, give them another shot with the flash.
It's the last cast before you're like,
just barely glowing. And I think it has to do a lot with the situation. So like, there are some piers and marinas that are typically murky. They're murky water, and those really bright spoons, they do very well. And other harbors and stuff that are more clear water, I find it kind of like spooks the fish a bit. Because I find, just like those old guys used to say, instead of like just giving the spoon a full blast, I'll just kind of like do it quick so that it just is barely glowing, and I'll catch more fish like that. And I don't know if it's because it's just super bright. Like, it is a very, very bright glow, those moonshines.
Yeah.
And I think it's very situational. So I think if you want to be an effective angler, you really have to look at the situation and don't just be like, oh, this one glows the best, it's going to catch fish in every situation. It's not. So that's why, you know, the little Clios, they don't have the best glow of all time, but they are one of the most successful spoons. Why is that? Well, it's because of the action of the lure. It has nothing to do with the glow. Yeah. They glow enough that they catch fish. The fish can see them. They don't need to see them and have sunglasses on. That being said, there are lots and lots of fish that we've caught on the moonshines, and they're very, very popular. They are a little more expensive, but I can't even describe the glow. It is very, very bright. Yeah. And you shine that thing like with a flashlight or with a camera flash,
or a UV.
It glows forever. Yeah. Like, you don't have to charge that thing for like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So, and then if you are fishing during the day, which can be really good, especially if like a storm's coming or it's raining, something like that, I do recommend, you can still catch fish on glow spoons during the day, because if you notice, a lot of the glow spoons, the back is still silver.
Yep.
So it's also a good option. But one color that I've done really good on is little Clio 3/4 ounce. It's silver and half chartreuse on the side. I've also done well with the hammered ones. Yeah. I know Andrew likes the hammered blue one. I like the hammered green one. Again, I don't think it really matters.
He likes color green. I like the color blue. Like, it's...
Yeah. Another thing quickly to say about spoons is you'll notice that I'm holding two spoons. Yeah. This one has a big single hook. It's called a Siwash. And this one has a treble hook. Huge debates. Some anglers are like, oh...
It's split pretty much 50-50.
Yeah. Siwash, to me, the way that I feel like, you will hook more fish on a treble hook, but you also lose more fish and you do more damage to the fish. I know, you know, this fish are going to die anyway, but when I hook a fish, I want to hook the fish and I don't want it to get off. When I hook a fish on a Siwash hook, the big single hook, they never get off.
I've never had one throw a Siwash.
Yeah, they hook them good. They're sharp.
Yep.
I find, especially when you're using like kind of a longer,
it's penetrating one hook point into that bony mouth.
So much more penetration.
Not two, or three.
And once you hook the fish, they're hooked.
Yeah.
That being said, I do feel sometimes when you fish a Siwash hook that salmon will swipe at the lure and they don't get pinned.
The biggest thing too with a Siwash hook is when you are putting it on, because some you'll buy, they come with a Siwash hook in the package. So depending on the spoon you buy, some they'll come just with one already on it. But if you buy your own hook, they have, generally spoons have a split ring, so they're really easy to put on. Some of them you can pinch onto the bottom, but you can get the closed eye ones. When you put it on, make sure that the curve of the spoon is sitting up, as if you're holding a spoon to eat some soup or something. And then you want your hook to point up from that. Yes. Because if you have it the other way around, with the hook pointing up off the back bump, they'll grab it and it'll pull right over the hook point when you try and set the hook. So if you're saying, oh, the Siwash hooks are terrible and never hook up, just double check. Maybe it's on backwards and try swapping it around. Because I know the first time I didn't know what I was doing and I just put one on and hookup ratio was terrible. Yeah. Absolutely atrocious. And I was like, Jesse's like, you have that backwards. I'm like, oh, learning experiment.
Yeah. Another thing I find is the Siwash hook kind of hangs farther back. And a lot of times Chinook, I've seen a lot of like underwater footage of them like trolling spoons and they'll just come up right behind the bait, kind of nip at it and swim away. Yep. And I find that the hook is slightly farther back. I feel like I hit a few more fish than if it's a treble hook. I don't know. I use both. I find that early in the season when I'm first starting to fish, I fish a treble hook. I just have more confidence that I'm actually going to hook a fish. And usually when they grab a treble hook, a lot of times they get hooked really good. But they do pull out sometimes. And again, as we said, the Siwash hook, when you hook them, generally speaking, you get better penetration and they're hooked. They don't come off. They lose a lot of leverage. It's a lot to do with angler preference. And I do find though a lot of people that have never tried it hate it. They're like, have a big opinion on something that they haven't done themselves. I would recommend trying one, see if you like it. If you don't like it, it's not the end of the deal. I don't care what you do. Yeah. I literally don't. And you know what? You shouldn't care what I do. But anyway, that's spoons. Now, we're going to talk very briefly on how to fish a spoon. And Andrew's going to explain the countdown method to you.
So generally spoons will sink about a foot a second. Yep. So if you cast out, you're fishing a 20-foot, the water's 20 foot deep in the pier, let's say, off the pier, and you cast out, you bomb your cast 80 feet out, 100 feet out, whatever. You can count a count of 19 seconds, let's say. You're 19 feet down, and then you slowly start reeling your spoon in, and that's going to come along close to the bottom. Or, they're suspending. The salmon are close to the surface, so you don't want to let it sit. You want to count, 1-2 seconds, and it's 2 feet below the water. So when finding out and varying how far it sinks down during your cast, if you have knowledge about the area, use that to your advantage. But if you're trying to locate where the fish are that day or in that area, vary your depth that you start your retrieve at. And that might be the determining factor on whether or not you actually start hooking it to fish.
Yeah. So again, like you said, if you say you're fishing a pier and it's, 30 feet, the one we fish is like, it's almost 30 feet. Sometimes the fish are right under the surface. You'll just see them jumping out of the water and just like splashing right at the surface.
And sometimes they're tucked right underneath that lip at 30 feet.
Yeah. So try different depths. Generally speaking, I'm going to, maybe count down 7-8 feet, try a few casts, nothing, and I'll count down 10 feet and just start working down, start working up, see what's going on. And again, that's going to change depending on the position of the sun. So maybe as the sun starts going down, they start coming shallower. So just constantly adapt. That's the main tip. But spoons, it's just a slow retrieve. You can even feel that thing thumping as you reel it in. If you reel them too fast and they're spinning, you're doing it wrong. Yeah. Okay.
I have never had one hit. I might have one hit when I was burning it in or something. I thought maybe it was fouled, so I started reeling it in fast. And I think I had one hit, but I didn't get it hooked.
Yeah.
But if I find myself reeling too fast, I'm not catching anything. I slow it down. You want to feel it kick back and forth. The spoon is not designed to spin. It's designed to sachet, to flutter, to wobble. Yeah. That's the whole point of the spoon. That's what they're designed to do. That's what Len Thompson was out on his boat hammering away at the spoon, so it would have a nice wobble, not a spin.
Yeah. And one thing I noticed, one time I was fishing out of a boat for salmon. We had 2 rods out, spoons, and every time we turned, so the outside rod, the spoon would have to speed up to go around that turn. The inside rod would slow down. Every time we turned that particular day, the inside rod, the one that really just slowed down, and the thing was probably not even fluttering that much. It was almost stopping. That rod would just get smashed. And I got out fish that day. I couldn't even switch sides because I was on that side of the boat. The guy I was fishing with, he caught like 4 or 5 and I caught 1. Yeah. It was insane. But it just it really shows you that sometimes the speed has a huge factor in if you're going to catch fish. All right. Now the next lures you should get, like literally we're only going through a few lures. So like spoons.
We focus a lot on spoons because they're the quintessential salmon casting bait from shore.
80% of the time I'm using a spoon.
Yep.
Most of the time. So the second and last lure we're going to discuss is crankbaits. Because I feel like there's one crankbait that everyone says, oh, you need this lure. But then there's a few other ones that I feel like they're underutilized.
Yeah.
And for me, again, fishing off the pier for years, I see some people use them, but not a lot.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's a mistake because these are great. I shouldn't even be telling you this, but I like when you watch those YouTube videos and they're like, I really shouldn't be telling you this, but it's like, come on.
It's like,
this isn't a secret.
You figured that out yourself and no one else ever has.
So why don't you talk about this one there? This is probably one of the most iconic in our area anyway.
Yep.
Baits.
So this is the Rapala J13. So
Fire Tiger.
Fire Tiger color, which a lot of guys like the Fire Tiger. Some of the guys really like the orange as well. It's a very
actually
popular
do
color.
very well with the orange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but Fire Tiger is, these, again, in our area, they sell out. Every single year, you can't find these in stores for about 3 months.
Yeah.
A few factors about these to keep in mind. When you're casting them, they have zero weight transfer system in them whatsoever. There's no rattles, nothing. They cast terribly, as in for distance.
Not terrible, but it's not amazing.
Yeah, like they're a fairly heavier bait. I'd say they're half ounce or maybe 5/8.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not three, they're under 3/4. They're lighter than a spoon. And then wind resistance, and you catch these things and they start like fishtailing and flying through the air.
Yeah.
You're going to lose about 20 feet on your cast.
Or more. Yeah.
If you're casting this, if you just came from casting a spoon.
Because you can launch a little Clio like forever.
Yeah.
Like a mile. Like it just keeps going. But these lures, very air resistant. So
yeah. They dive about, on a long retrieve, you can probably get them down
8
max, I'd say.
Yeah.
I was going to say like 6. If you are doing a nice slow retrieve, you can get these things to run and wobble nicely at about 2 feet under the surface.
Yeah.
Like consistently 2 feet the whole way across at a nice slow retrieve. The last thing I'll mention about them is, and again, like their action of it drives the salmon wild in our area. Like they nail these things.
And
they
I think
kill them.
the bright color too, it just, these fish, they're so amped up on hormones. Like they're just like so amped up that these bright, annoying, wobbling, the hooks are clicking, everything. It just drives them insane. And when they hit this thing, it's like hooking a freight train.
It's insane.
They just smash it and instantly just start running. It's like you hook it and it's like
And that brings me to the last point on these is huge recommendation, upgrade the hooks.
Upgrade the hooks. Yes.
The Rapala hooks, they're good. If you're catching like a pike, you could get a pike on this. If you don't horse it in, you could get bass on this. Not a problem. But a salmon, they have such hard mouths and they have such force, like one head shake, that'll straighten this hook out. No problem.
Yeah.
So if you only have like penetration on, let's say, one hook point, you want to make sure you land that fish. And chances are it's going to bend that hook out on a 20-pound king. No problem at all.
I have bent out hooks.
Oh, all the time.
And it's not that those are nice, like they're fairly heavy
pretty
gauge.
good,
There are better, sharper hooks. And if you're casting all night to get one fish and you're using a bait that has mediocre hooks, just upgrade the hooks and believe me, you'll catch more fish.
Yep.
So that is a one recommendation. And again, the size below that, I think it's the J11, J10, J9. Something like that.
So I don't think they have a J12. I think it's just the J13, J11 they have, I think a J9.
Yeah, so the J11, the size that's just, because that lure there is like 4.5, 5 inches, right?
Yep.
The one just smaller than that, the reason you don't see a lot of people fishing it is because it casts even worse because it's smaller.
And it's lighter. Yeah.
But in some areas or some smaller marinas where the salmon are stacking up, it can be good because it's smaller.
Generally, I can cast this, 60, 70 feet on it with a nice long rod?
I don't measure, but it casts decent.
But so again, like if it depends on the area you're fishing, I would love to throw this more than a spoon if the area that we fished had we didn't have to cast as far. Where we normally fish, the strike zone is primarily in those 20, 30 feet that we can reach with the spoon.
Yeah.
So once you cast this in those areas, you're not actually getting to where the fish are because they push up against this big weed bed. And they do come in shallower, but most of the fish stop at that weed bed and start running across. And so with a spoon, you can actually get it 20 feet, 30 feet into that strike zone. You cast this, you're reaching the strike zone, but not into it. So that's the issue with it.
Yeah.
But again, depending where you're fishing, you can cast baits that perhaps don't cast as far if you only have to reach 60 feet. Not a problem.
So really, again, adapt to the situation. Mm-hmm. Not all situations are going to be the same, but this is a proven, and they're a little pricey. I think they're almost $20 now. $18, $19, which is a bit crazy.
Keep your eye open when you're walking around in the harbors of the pier areas, though, because salmon will snap those off of guys. They'll snap the line, and they'll shake the hook later, and those things, because they float, will come right into shore. So keep your eye open. I found a few over the years, and then you just swap out the hook.
True. Now we're going to go over 2 crankbaits that have been absolutely lights out for me, and then we're going to get into gear quick. So, also about the J13, you just cast it and then you just reel it in.
Yep.
And what I found is you can reel them in at a fair speed. Sometimes when it's slow, the fish will hit it, but I find sometimes the salmon just want to chase, and that'll help. It'll like trigger them into committing. Like if they're just kind of cruising around and this thing just whips by their head and they kind of just like react and grab it. And I've had lots of days where I'm casting that thing out and I'm reeling it in, and it's just maybe a foot or two under the surface, and a big wake comes up behind. You'll just see a salmon just shoot across, and just literally it's like 3, 2, 1, boom, and you just instantly hit the fish and it just starts running. It's insane.
Salmon fishing is fun.
Oh, it's insane.
It is fun.
So, all right. So the last 2 baits we're going to talk about. This one is more of a bait that I like to troll, but you can cast them. It's the Storm Hot and Tot. This is the rattle tot, actually, because that's rattles. But it's a crankbait, but it has a crazy hunting action. And we discussed what a hunting action is on a lot of crankbaits in a few of the podcasts. But basically,
it has a variable diving depth as well. You can move that clip on the lip into the second eyelet hole there, and it'll actually run shallower.
Yeah. But
that thing runs deep too.
It does run pretty deep, and it's a decent, I think it's like ½ ounce, but you cast this thing out, it dives pretty deep right away. It has a nice like steep dive curve. And then it just has like a crazy noise.
You hear that thing when you're trolling it 50 feet behind the boat, you still hear it.
Yeah.
It's vibrating right up your rod.
This particular one I've caught many fish on. Half the paint on the lip is chipped off. I've replaced the hook several times. It's got teeth marks all over it. And it's just like a little trooper. It's got a metal lip too. So just it's an investment of a lure that can take a lot of abuse. If you're hitting like a lot of rocks and stuff like that, it drives the fish insane. It's just a crazy crankbait. You can cast it. We have cast it in some shallower areas sometimes, and the fish just smash it.
One of the other baits, just as a little side tangent, kind of, you mentioned the metal lip and the good quality hooks. A Rapala bait, instead of the J13, I'll sometimes, when I'm trolling especially, I'll use the saltwater rated jointed Rapalas. And they have steel lips. You can still get them today. And they have a steel lip diving, and they run a little bit deeper than the J13, and they have saltwater grade hooks. They're strong hooks. I don't have to swap them out. You can sharpen them like insanely sharp because they're just solid steel. That's something that I also really like. Again, it's very similar to the J13. It's just a bit more heavy duty because it's the saltwater version of the jointed Rapala.
Which is perfect for salmon fishing.
Yep.
But generally speaking, any brightly colored, annoying crankbait with rattles in it is going to be good.
Yeah.
But if you could only have one crankbait for casting, it's going to be a lipless crankbait.
Yes.
And this is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated salmon fishing lures ever. So the advantages of using a lipless, this is a Rapala Rattling Wrap. One of my favorites, though, is a Cotton Cordell Super Spot, just because they're cheap. They're like $5. Used to be able to find them at like Canadian Tire in the clearance bin for $2. I replaced the hooks with like good hooks.
Yep.
$2. Fire Tiger, why is this such a good bait, though?
The rattles are extremely like aggressive. Like salmon kill that.
You can hear this like 20, 30 feet away when you're reeling it in.
Yeah. And there's been so many times. I remember the first time, I think it was you who caught one on it. I can't remember. I know I was fishing with you. I can't remember if I tied it on or you. You're fishing and it was sundown. It was like pitch black now. I think it was 11 o'clock at night. We weren't catching anything on spoons. Nothing on the glow spoons. Nothing on the J13s. Again, it's nighttime. The J13s don't glow either. So we're like, I wonder if a salmon can zero in on a rattle bait, because they don't have the same lateral line like largemouth bass do.
Yeah.
And so I can't remember if it was me or you cast it out, and like first cast, like boom, nailed one.
It was you, because it was that big one.
Right. Yeah. So they can zero in on the rattle still because it's so loud. And I think like, it's just aggravating. So they search that thing, they find it, and they will kill it. And Jesse, actually, we found this stuff on Amazon, this glow paint, which glows like really, really well. And so we've turned a couple of them into glow versions.
Yeah, and you can get ones with that glow already. They're hard to find, like a rattle bait that glows, but I have found a few brands over the years. Yeah. But the best thing, in my opinion, about a lipless crankbait is they cast.
Yeah.
They cast a mile. That's one advantage. Number 2 is they're annoying as heck. And number 3 is you can fish them at any depth.
I was going to say variable depth. Yep.
Yeah, just like a spoon. So like you cast it out, they sink about 1 foot a second, same as a spoon. Spoon might be a little slower because they kind of flutter down.
Yeah.
But say you're fishing off a pier and you're like, you know what, the fish, I haven't seen any jump. So maybe they're deeper and you want to go down 10 feet. Cast it out, leave your bail open, let it count 10 seconds. It's down 10 feet, then reel it in and literally just burn it in. And the strikes on these are insane. They try to kill it.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's a slightly smaller bait with 2 treble hooks, usually when they grab
hookup
it,
ratio is
the
really
hookup
good.
ratio is really good. Actually, go ahead.
So you reminded me, because I just wanted to make an amendment to something we said in a previous episode. We were talking about the cast. I was telling a story about the cast, the spoon.
The Cast King.
Casting. So I don't think it's the Cast King. I think it's called the Cast Master.
Cast Master, yes.
So I just wanted to make an amendment. I'm sure we sounded like fools to anyone who's like yelling at the podcast, like, you fools. It's the Cast Master spoon, which you can also use for salmon, but it's, again, that thing sinks like a stone.
Yeah.
So that countdown depth is not going to apply to that spoon. Like you said, different spoons, they flutter down different ways. You can get flutter spoons. They're lighter. They take a long time to fall. The little Clio, like I said, or Len Thompson, they're generally about 1 foot a second, just like the Rattling Wrap. About 1 foot a second because they're heavier, they're thicker walled. But you get the Cast Master, and that thing will sink like 2 feet a second.
Yes. I'd highly recommend if you're just getting into salmon fishing at the harbors and you can only buy a few lures, I would pick up maybe as many little Clios as you can get, like 2, 3, 4. Get a bunch. You probably have some lures in your bass tackle box that will catch salmon, like rattle baits, crank baits, jerk baits have done well. Husky jerks have done well for us. They'll hit a lot of baits. Like we're oftentimes thinking like we're fishing, and Andrew's always like, you know what? I almost guarantee I could catch a salmon on a chatterbait. Like I'm almost sure they'd hit it. But the thing is, some baits are better than others. But if you're just getting started out, I'd pick up some spoons. I'd pick up a few crankbaits, and that's it. You're fine. And the thing that I always tell people is, again, I used to work at a tackle shop, and people would come in and be like, you know what? I did what you told me to do. I went down to the harbor and I didn't catch anything. And I'm like, you got to put in the time. Some days, like we mentioned, some days you'll go, especially early season, and the fish are just, they're not interested. They're there. You can see them jumping. Yep. Usually when they're jumping, they're not biting.
It's a fun time to see them jumping though.
Yeah. Like I've brought people that have never fished for basically anything, and I'll take them salmon fishing at a rivermouth, and they're like, wow, look at all these fish. And they're just porpoising and jumping, flipping out of the air, and the fish aren't biting. And other days it's like dead calm and the fish are just smacking. So like you got to put in the time. You got to keep going. I almost guarantee you, I can't say 100%. If you go down to a rivermouth in September or early October and cast a spoon or a crankbait in the same spot, like in a good area where it's nice and deep and there's salmon running around, eventually you will connect with one.
Yep.
Salmon are not smart.
If you went for 2 hours every day for 1 week, and you're like, this week I'm going to do it, there's a pretty good chance you're going to at least find one fish. Yeah. Going 2 hours every day in the evening.
Yeah. And again, the techniques, you can even bring kids, people that aren't, super experienced fishing, because the technique,
casting straight out.
You're casting straight out.
Skip under this dock, but I don't know how. It's like, you know how to cast overhand? Perfect. Yeah. Everyone does.
Hooking them is not the hard part. Getting them into the shore is the hard part. A lot of people will be like, oh, you just fish for bass. I fish for salmon. It's like, let me tell you secrets. Fishing for salmon is off the pier is literally one of the easiest things you can do. It's not a brag to say you can catch salmon off the pier. You just cast and reel in. It's easy. Don't let it be intimidating. So those are the lures we're going to cover. Again, the YouTube video that we'll link down below. We actually went into a whole bunch of different lures, different types of spoons, different thicknesses of spoons, if you should use a swivel, like all that kind of stuff. We're going to go over equipment quick. And again,
time has been flying by in this episode again.
Oh yeah. This is just hardware. There are other ways to catch salmon in the harbor, like fishing eggs on the bottom, float fishing. We're not covering that because that involves for a beginner a lot different techniques. So anyway, we're going to go over gear. So we have a lot of gear of ourselves that I've tried rods, spinning rods generally from 8.5 to 10.5 feet long. And I'd say if I had to recommend to anyone, like when I worked at the tackle shop, people would come in and be like, I want a pure rod. That's all they want is a pure rod, medium heavy spinning. I've used mediums. I've used medium heavies. One of my buddies had a heavy one time, a little too heavy, but a medium heavy is like a great overall rod. You can cast it casts like a 3/4 ounce little Clio, like perfectly. And my favorite length, it really depends on your height. It depends where you're fishing. My personal favorite is 9.5 foot. I have 8.5 footers. They're a little short. I do like them in the boat. In smaller areas where casting distance isn't as big of a deal, 8.5 footers are fine. 9.5 is great. I had a 10.5 for a while. It's actually a 13 fishing Fate steel. It was a medium 10.5 foot. It was amazing. And I actually broke it because I tripped and fell on it. And I was so mad because they don't make them anymore, I'm pretty sure. But it was a 10.5. And I tell you, I could whip a Cleo like to the sun. It was just like, you wouldn't even see where it landed. And it fought fish great. It was a little long and fatiguing to use. I got a 9.5 foot rod. And I find that that's the perfect length. The reason why you're going to want, what are the advantages? Like, you may have like a 7 foot medium spinning rod. Like, why wouldn't you want to use that? Like, I'm not saying you can't do it.
Well, as someone who's caught salmon on that exact rod, there's two big things. One is your casting distance is way less on a shorter rod.
Yeah.
When casting distance means everything about reaching those fish, a long rod has a huge advantage over it.
Yeah.
The second thing is when fighting that fish, again, yeah, you're fishing a lot of open water, but if you're fishing on a pier around a harbor, there's docks, there's dock posts, you want to have some sort of fish control. And with a shorter rod, I was using a heavy action bass rod, like just spinning rod, and I hooked into a salmon, and it was, I think it was a 24 pound salmon, 23, somewhere in that range, like a decent salmon.
Yep.
Nice handful of eggs. And I hooked into that thing, and I was completely at the mercy of that fish. I could do absolutely nothing. All the play on that fish was down to my reel. And I was just hoping that the drag was up to the task of this thing, peeling offline, swimming towards me, trying to reel it in quick. I had zero control, zero advantage with that rod because, one, it was very stiff. So even, the weight of the fish was bending it over, but when it turned direction, I had very little time to try and pick up that slack. And then, as well, even with it loaded up, I'm trying to turn the fish's head to try and get it onto shore, get it close to me so I can net it. I couldn't turn the head to get it pointing towards the net. So those are the two huge, biggest things for me. Can you do it? Technically, yeah. But there are way better advantages to having a longer rod. You have way more leverage on that fish, and way better casting.
The control factor is huge. Yeah. Even the difference between fishing an 8.5 rod and a 9.5 rod, you might be like, oh, it's only a foot, it doesn't matter. But you will notice you can cast farther, and the leverage, longer rods have longer handles.
Yeah.
And the leverage when you cast, it's a lot less fatiguing with a slightly longer rod. Again, you don't want to go too long because then it'll get fatiguing. I remember I have a bit of a bad shoulder. So when I was using some of my bigger rods or like musky rods, it does eventually get to your shoulder, especially on a long night.
Musky fishing as well.
Yeah. But that's what we recommend. You can use bait casting equipment. They do sell, salmon bait casters that are longer lengths, but that's more of an advanced technique that we're not going to cover in this basic podcast. But if you want some information on that, you can send us a message. When it comes to reels, again, spinning reels for salmon, again, I've seen it all working at the taco shop over the years. Like, people would buy like a $40 reel that's too small and then go fishing for kings with like 50-pound braided line because they thought, oh, these are big fish, I'm going to use heavy line. So they have this tiny, cheap reel with not even enough line on it because the line's too thick, and then get completely spooled and their drag like washers melt together. Like, obviously, like, this is one technique where you should spend a little more money on the reel, because if you've ever hooked a king salmon that's fresh at the lake, they peel off line like at 30K.
Oh, it's nuts.
They just grab your
first
lure
salmon. I got so frustrated because the first 3 salmon I ever hooked into, and that year I didn't actually land one.
Yeah,
but I hooked 3, and it's all on the same night.
He lost all my lures.
Like, gone.
Yeah,
like every single time. And my issue was I was using 30-pound braid. There was no stretch in the braid, and it would hook up, but the line literally kept snapping with the force of this fish pulling line off. And what was happening, I believe, is my drag is just my bass reel, and it was heating up too fast and was putting too much tension on the line, and then it would snap it. 30-pound braid, just snapping. Every single, 3 times in a row, I'd have it on for like a second or 2 seconds, 2 Mississippis, and it's like, zzz, gone.
Yeah.
Annoying as heck.
Which is also why it's good to have a longer rod, because it's more of a shock absorber. For reels, I'm not saying you can't catch them on a 2,500 size, but you're going to want a 4,000 size at least. Some anglers like 5,000 size. 4,000 for me. Again, I invested a little bit more into my reels because I want reels that last. I bought this reel like a long time ago.
That would be like my ideal salmon reel.
This is a Stratic 4,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might get the 5,000 just because the 5,000 is just a bigger spool on the same reel body, I believe.
It is slightly bigger though. Yeah.
Okay.
But the 5,000 would be a good crossover reel for fishing saltwater too, which would be amazing. But any quality, I'm not saying a Stratic, but any quality Okuma, Shimano, Daiwa reel that's not one of those lightweight bass reels. Like, you know, the lightweight bass reels that are like made of carbon fiber and lightweight. That's literally not what you want.
Full aluminum.
You want an aluminum reel. Yeah. Another good brand is Penn.
Yep.
Penn makes like aluminum, like full aluminum reels. You don't have to spend a lot. You could probably spend $100 and get a pretty decent reel. And you want to load like a 4,000 or 5,000 reel. You want to load that with braided line. That would be my recommendation. I use mono for years. It does have a lot of stretch. So sometimes on a long cast, it won't cast as far as braid because it's thicker. Sometimes on a long cast, if you hook a king, you can't get the hooks in them because there's too much stretch. So I do like braid. Oftentimes I will use a shock leader. We're not going to get into that because that's a whole nother topic. But again, that's in that YouTube video that we linked below. We have a whole spiel about why we like using shock leaders, which is basically, very shortly, it's just like a long length of monofilament as a shock, and usually like 10, 12 pound test. Anyway, braided line, I'd recommend 10 is too thin for me. I find that it's just too thin and wispy. I do like 15 or 20. 15 or 20 is literally only 6 pound thin. You can load up a 4,000 with like, you know, a lot of line. I've had times where I almost thought I was going to get spooled, but it's never happened. On a 2,500, I've seen guys get spooled.
I usually use 30-pound braid because it's 10 pound thin. Again, even that, I haven't gotten spooled on a 4,000 with that even.
Yeah. I found over the years, like I used 20 for a while, and 20 is 6 pound thin, and you can cast a mile. It was good, and I'd use a mono leader too. And then I went down to 15. And I think that's where I am now. Like 15 is fine. I've had guys say like, oh, I like using 10, but it seems too thin for me. 10 pounds.
It's crazy when you think of, I put 10 pound tests on my BFS.
Yeah.
Like I don't like 10 pound braid. It's super thin. I can't imagine loading one up with that. But anyway. Definitely one of those things where if you spooled it yourself, you'd be buying 2 spools of braid to fill that reel.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Another thing I would recommend too is like one of the other reasons we use sometimes a shock absorber, like a leader, is just because like where we fish, there's lots of dock posts. So braided line, as we mentioned in our fishing line episode a few back, it doesn't have as much abrasion resistant as monofilament.
Yeah.
So that's another reason. But again, you need a big reel because when you hook one of these kings, I always tell my buddies, it's like hooking a rapidly sinking anchor. There's no stopping it. It'll just swim and swim and swim really fast. And if you have a 2,500, I can't even think of all the times I saw off the pier over the years that people without actual salmon gear get spooled. That means a salmon grabs their spoon and runs full speed away from them and pulls all their line off the reel and snaps it.
Yep.
So take that. You don't want to do that. That is.
And the last thing I'd mention as well is when you're looking at reels, the Stratics are known, and Shimano is known for having a very good drag system.
Yes.
Very smooth. Again, if it's choppy coming out, then chances are the salmon can snap that line way easier. You want a smooth drag. So do your research on whatever reel you're getting. There are guys online that they'll do tests on the drag, like insane, like testing the drag. They'll go, use a bass reel and go, tuna fishing with it just to see it like burn up. So stuff like that. Do some research on the reel you're getting to make sure that it's big enough. Yes. That will hold enough line, but you don't want your drag system to fail, because even if it holds a bunch of line, but you've got a terrible drag system in that, it's still going to snap. It's not going to work effectively.
Yeah, and that's the main point too, is not to buy a cheap reel, because a lot of the cheaper reels, they have like a lot of plastic components. Yep. A salmon is the one fish that will actually test your gear. Like when you're bass fishing,
you get a nice like ceramic drag system. Like that's nice.
Like when you're bass fishing, generally speaking, bass aren't pulling line off your reel. Like maybe if you're small fishing with like light line, but you generally hook a bass and it's in the boat pretty soon. Salmon is like the opposite of that. You hook it and it goes on its initial run. I would say like these are the stages of hooking a salmon. Oftentimes you hook a salmon and it grabs your lure and then it starts head shaking because it doesn't realize something's pulling on it. As soon as it realizes it's hooked, it's like it shoots and it goes fast. Like we're talking 20, 25 kilometers an hour in the opposite direction, or even more terrifyingly, straight towards you. And you're reeling in line really fast. But when they go away from you, they go on their first run. There's nothing you can do. Yep. You literally tighten your drag nice, not too tight, not too loose, and just let them go. And then they stop and they start shaking again. And then you try to pull on them and then they go on a second run. And it's insane. And you just hang on and you're yelling at people to get out of the way. It is an insane way to catch fish. And again, it is the most accessible way for the average angler to catch probably the biggest fish of their life. And like I know, like I was there when Andrew caught a fish that was like, over 25 pounds in a canoe.
Yeah, the scale maxed out at 25, and the tail wasn't out of the water.
Yeah.
So it was approaching 30. I don't think it was 30, but it was pretty close.
Yeah, a lot of people overestimate the size of their salmon, but most of them are pretty far off. They're like, I was a 30-pounder, and I'm like, 20, 22, yeah. But anyway, this is just a basic episode. We're going to get more into it next week when we're talking about stream fishing for salmon, which is a totally different topic, totally different way to catch them. But that YouTube video we did, I'm happy with that video because we actually put a lot of effort into that video. Yeah. It's been out for maybe 3-4 years, but we covered everything. We covered everything. Yeah. So definitely check that video. Again, we'll put in the link below. So we could not cover everything. If we just talk about even some stories that we have about fishing for salmon.
We need to allocate a fair bit of time for salmon fishing in the creek because some of the stories I have about salmon fishing in the creek are insane. I do have a couple even from shore casting though that are cool, but I don't think we have time for stories this episode. Unfortunately. But fall is again,
it's one of the best
by the time
times
you're
of
listening to this. Fall is just around the corner.
Yeah.
And we'll have a couple more episodes to talk about salmon. We'll find time to sprinkle in some stories. We might even, salmon is one of those things we have a lot of stories for. We might even be able to do a full episode of story times.
Of salmon stories, yeah. I think we should. Anyway, we'd like to mention at this time, we do have a Patreon because, why? I'll tell you why. Because there are monthly expenses to making this podcast. At this time, we're not making any profit. We're actually paying for this out of our own pocket. There are a few Patreons already. We'd like to thank those guys. There's 4 or 5 of them right now that are helping us put a dent in the expenses.
Yeah.
If you'd like to help us cover some of the expenses for the show, that'd be great. The link to our Patreon is in the show notes. You can donate $1 or $2. It doesn't have to be a lot. That would be much appreciated. But we would like to thank you for listening. And next week, I forgot what we said we're going to do.
Next week, I believe, is going to be our camping episode.
No, next week is fishing in the streams.
Oh, that's right.
I forgot already. Anyway, sometimes we promise some episodes are coming up and then I switch it around. So if you're listening and you're expecting the next episode to be a certain thing and then we do another thing, I apologize. It's a little whack. Anyway, we'd like to thank you for listening and we'll catch you next time.